fallacy on our list that we're going to discuss is begging the question. You might hear a version of this fallacy referred to as the fallacy of circular reasoning, or you might call it arguing in a circle. Now, the problem that takes place with begging the question is typically this. An arguer will state her conclusion and then provide a reason that is little more than a restatement of the conclusion. I'll repeat that. One of the standard ways that begging the question is committed is an arguer will begin with the conclusion, and then what she'll do, or he, will be to provide a reason, which is really not a reason at all. It is just a restatement of the conclusion that is supposed to be what is being supported. Now, one of my favorite examples that you may have seen in the practice problems was when an interview asked an artist's model, "Why did the artist paint you so often?" The model responded, "Because I am his model." Now, you'll notice that that is an answer that really doesn't answer anything. Because when we ask a question like, well, why did he paint you so much? We don't want to hear, well, because I was his model. We want to hear why you were his model. In other words, we want to hear some kind of coherent account or explanation, rather than just merely restating the premise. Now, sometimes begging the question you might hear referred to as the fallacy of circular reasoning, and this is because when the circular reasoning version takes place, the conclusion will appeal to a premise that presupposes the truth of the conclusion. Now, I'll give you the silly example that has probably been in just about every textbook that I have taught from, ever. Student, how do I know that the Bible is true? Guess why? Because the Bible says so. Now, the reason why that's circular is because the truth of the original statement is contingent upon our assuming the truth of the original statement. In other words, it is a conclusion whose premise refers back to the truth of the conclusion itself, when in fact, what we need is a reason why we should trust the conclusion. Now, this example might appeal to some, my next one might appeal to some of you. Go ahead.
Question, did you see the State Farm commercial where she says that you can't put anything on the internet that isn't true, and then he says, well, how do you know that? The internet told me.
Bam! Oh, sorry about I sound like that. I sound like that chef from Futurama. Sorry about that. That's a great example. I remember that commercial. Alan, excuse me, made the comment that about the State Farm commercial where someone says, well, everything you find out, everything that's put up on the internet's true. Well, how do you know that? Well, I read that on the internet. I can't think of a better example than that one. And I remember that commercial pretty well. Because it presupposes, just like in the earlier example, the very proof of the conclusion that we're trying to find, a good reason for believing.
Why is it true?
Yeah. So the internet told me. Well, how do you know the internet's true? Well, the internet told me in a circle. Exactly. In a circle.
Okay.
Now, this next example might not appeal to everyone, but hear me out. I'm pretty sure it will appeal to those of you who have taken Introduction to Philosophy. because you've probably heard this argument before. In most intro to philosophy classes, there will be a discussion of whether or not human beings possess free will. In other words, if the choices that we make are indeed not conditioned by outside motivators pulling our puppet strings. In other words, thus, we are autonomous and responsible for our own actions. Well, as soon as students hear me laying out some of the arguments against free will, I will frequently have at least one student, and they'll even argue this on the test. They will say, how do I know that I have free will? Because I make choices every day. Well, that begs the question. Simply because you make choices every day doesn't mean that your choices are made freely in the metaphysical sense. Because in fact, yeah, I make choices to come to work, but am I really free not to come to work? No, there are punishments, like losing money and things of that nature. Do I freely choose my likes and my dislikes? No, I like to eat hot sauce. It tastes good to me. And I wonder how anyone could say, well, you could choose otherwise. I don't know about that. I like what I like what I like. And I'm not prepared to say that my choices are freely made. The problem is those who argue for free will and say, but you make choices. They're begging the question because they are still presupposing, with that word choice, that it implies that your choices are free, without actually going the next step and arguing why. The word choice itself might beg the question. In other words, import certain assumptions that need to be proven on their own grounds. Thanks.